tutti, vi parla Eugenio Novario di Limit Club Cisalpino e questa sera abbiamo l'onore di ospitare due esperti ed accademici eccezionali sulla recentissima crisi ucraina, quali Jensen e Cella. Il webinar è coorganizzato da Limit Club Washington e da VUIS Italy Global Affairs Forum. Voglio ringraziare, oltre ai due relatori, di cui fra un minuto vi esporrò il cursus honorum, Lorenzo Tita del nostro club, Daniele Moro e Shai Ricchetti per l'Imes Club Washington, unitamente ovviamente a VUIS Italy Global Affairs Forum. Jensen è uno dei più grandi esperti di Russia presenti negli Stati Uniti. Ha svolto anche una carriera diplomatica, è stato a lungo nell'ambasciata a Mosca e tra le moltissime attività da lui appunto svolte nella sua lunga carriera c'è stata anche quella di essere uno dei 10 americani che avevano il compito di controllare lo smantellamento dei siti nucleari sovietici post 91. Cella dell'Università Cattolica, oltre che essere un caro amico da lungo tempo, ha appena pubblicato forse il libro più completo e accademicamente profondo relativamente alla geopolitica dell'Ucraina. Un libro che nell'illustrare il passato spiega con grande perizia il presente e da dove la crisi ucraina nasce nella storia. Secondo me c'è un esempio che ben illustra il rapido ed inatteso evolversi degli eventi nella modalità così drammatica come oggi le notizie dei telegiornali di tutto il mondo ci illustrano. Il primo titolo scelto da me e Lorenzo Tita di questo webinar, se mi ricordo bene l'abbiamo scelto venerdì, sabato, era Ucraina, più fumo che fuoco. Lunedì, con i preziosi suggerimenti di Donald e Giorgio, abbiamo deciso di cambiare il titolo del webinar: Ucraina sull'orlo della crisi, sull'orlo della guerra. Se registrassimo oggi il webinar che invece è stato registrato lunedì sera, dovremmo cambiare ulteriormente la titolazione. La nostra speranza, che è la speranza di tutti gli uomini di buona volontà, è che agli eserciti si possa sostituire la via diplomatica, anche se personalmente ritengo che la mossa o l'invasione dell'Ucraina da parte della Russia putiniana sia un evento che condizionerà le relazioni internazionali, i rapporti geopolitici per i prossimi 20 anni. Come solo il futuro ce lo dirà. Eugenio Novario by Limit Club Cisalpino speaking, and I am honored to invite to you to follow this important webinar at the light of latest tragic event in Ukraine. Our host that speaking about the history and the geopolitics of Ukraine are Donald Jensen and Giorgio Cella. Donald Jensen is one of the most important scholar of Russia in USA, and Giorgio Cella has edited a very successful Italian book about geopolitical of Ukraine. Hope that this webinar could be interesting for you. I want to thank Lorenzo Tita of Limes Club Cisalpino, Daniele Moro and Ishai Richetti of Limes Club Washington and the US Italy Global Affairs Forum, co-organizer of this event. Thanks of your attention, and see you at the next event. Bye.
Hello, everyone. I have a question for Professor Jensen. Mr. Putin is meeting with the Russian Security Council. Now, what is your assessment of the situation from Washington, D.C.?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me on. I think you have to look at the weekend developments in a package. One is that the Russian military buildup continued. Second is that there were a lot of provocations clearly carried out by the Russian side to make it look like Ukraine was a threat in some way. Three, there was the last-minute diplomacy between Biden, Macron, and Mr. Putin last night, which seemed to indicate the possibility of a summit. That seems less likely this morning for the reasons you said, Daniele. You see, number one, a meeting of the expanded Security Council, and I say expanded because it's not normally the case that the entire group is there. Usually it's about 12 people. Second, you have the both houses of the Russian so-called parliament meeting this week, and there is before the president already a bill to recognize the independence of Donbass and Lugansk. So I think what we're moving toward, it seems to me, is a Russian move to recognize the independence of those two entities, and perhaps to be accompanied by a move of Russian troops into those regions to make them less stronger than they really are. And as you know, they have a lot of problems. So the bottom line is I think military tensions continue, that the political movements in Moscow about the status of Eastern Ukraine is very interesting. It suggests we may be entering a new phase of the crisis.
A second question. What do you think is the European attitude vis-a-vis Putin and this crisis?
I think in general, the Europeans have come together in a far more unified way than anybody would have predicted 6 months ago. And I think that not only the U.S. administration, but also several other European leaders have done a really good job rallying the allies, both the European Union and NATO. And of course, Macron and some others have acted somewhat on their own. I think what we've seen is, despite that unity, still a varying level of solidarity by the West toward the Russian policy in Ukraine. And we know Germany, of course. Italy seems more strongly on the U.S. side with the new prime minister, but we have to see. So I think in general, they pushed back well in a unified way. Many have given military assistance to the Ukrainian side. And I thought the drama in Munich over the weekend was especially impressive. That having been said, I do not think for a moment that there aren't differing levels of commitment to pushing back on Russia. So we have to see. And again, we all know the traditional divisions, differences of view in the European community. So we just have to see how this plays out if indeed Russia makes a move toward Ukraine again.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for Dr. Cella. Just first a general question, what's your intake on this situation, and in particular about the most recent developments, especially we have seen that maybe Macron has found a way to like freeze this conflict?
Well, first off, I'm delighted to be here, connected with you all, and I think that Europe is proven to be still having its chronic different divisions and different visions and different perspective on Russia. I think we have seen a lot of diplomatic activity coming from the two major powers in Europe, which is namely Germany and France, which has also been a kind of a platform for Macron to, let's say, shine domestically, because elections are soon to be held in France, while on the other side we have seen Germany pretty active in terms of diplomatic meetings with Putin and Russia. And right now, Germany has maybe a stronger position towards Russia because of the Nord Stream 2. We have seen that Biden as well as mentioned a possible halt to the Nord Stream 2 construction and ultimate functioning of the pipeline in case of invasion. On a wider general note, I would say that from an historian point of view as well, not only from the geopolitical analysis, I think that what we are seeing now is the rederationem, is the reckoning of a long process that started during the last phase of the Cold War, especially during the 90s, when the two sides, the West led by Bush Senior and Kohl, and the other side with Gorbachev, they made certain diplomatic negotiations that left the Soviet Union and the future Russian Federation with a way weaker position that they used to have during the 40 years of Soviet Union. So what is now Putin trying to do in this diplomatic cohesive diplomacy and armed diplomacy, this armed military pressure in and around Ukraine, is actually come to a major agreement with the West. And there are two chapters in my books which start in the title with verba volant scripta manent, which is a Latin saying that means that it's better to have written stuff rather than only verbal promises. And I think that and Putin indeed has stated many times that he wants his red lines to be recognized, and he wants this done with legally binding documents. And so I think that this long process of rearranging the power balance, the power of balance in the post-Soviet era, which is in the post-Soviet era, in the post-Soviet space, which is an immensely large area that goes from the Balkans to the Central Asian steppe, is something that Putin aims to, and this military pressure in and around Ukraine as the ultimate objective of reaching a diplomatic, wider solution, which is also a restructuring of a pan-Europe architecture security framework.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for actually you both. What is your opinion with regard to the European policy with respect to Putin? Are they gonna act divided, or will we be like a common front? Starting with Donald, please, and then.
Thank you. You don't have to call me doctor, sir.
Okay.
My view is that they are relatively, and I mean only relatively, and by the way, thank you, Giorgio, for your comments. They're very interesting. I think they are relatively united for now, but I do not think that this will continue even to the extent that we see today for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure most of us will agree with. And so I think Putin may well try to do things in response to carry out his objective in a way that is sort of, as we say, below the threshold of a European response. So, for example, if he annexes or recognizes the independence of Lugansk and Donbass, will that, in the view of the people in Berlin or Paris, require the imposition response of immediate, however Biden described it, massive sanctions? And I really have some doubt about that. I really am not sure. I hope that it will. I hope they would support it, but I'm not sure that it will. And this is yet the latest example of the differences of point of view, especially between Western and Eastern Europe. Whereas, of course, there's no doubt that Poland or the Baltic countries would respond very quickly, and that would be to the annoyance or even disagreement of Macron and Scholz. So we have to see. But I must say, I'm not even cautiously optimistic that Europe will hold together. I am more or less, let's wait and see, and I hope they do. And that does not inspire a lot of confidence.
Well, thank you, Donald. Thanks, Lorenzo, for the question. As I said before, there are different historical perspectives with regards to bilateral relations concerning different European countries. If you take, for instance, Italy has really long relations, stable bilateral relations with Russia, and the same could be said about Germany. Think about the old Bismarck system of trying to engage Russia continuously during the end of the 19th century, and goes on. Right now, I don't want to go into the details of history of international relations, but the same goes with France. Think about the 35 France-Soviet pact, for instance, of alliance concerning Eastern Europe. And then you have all the different geopolitical and energy and economical interest assets at stake. So we will see how this week's visit of Premier Draghi in Moscow will play out. We will see if he will do another whatever it takes policy, this time concerning Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We will see if the West will come with let's say, a single voice, at least in terms of the defense of some principles that after the Second World War have been pillars of the international system and of international law that have constituted the backbone of even going back to the Stimson Doctrine from the US side. I mean, so the stakes are so high, and so we will see. Also, looking at the evolution of what Donald was mentioning before, and what Danielle as well asked in the first question, whether Russia will finally recognize the independence of the two breakaway regions as well. This is, of course, a major point of possible evolution, also in terms of bilateral relations between France, Moscow, Berlin, Moscow, Rome, Moscow, and the whole European Union. Of course, let me just add this, that as Donald Rumsfeld said, there are two Europes now. The new Europe, which is way more frightened and has a different take on Russia. Let's say maybe the right definition is hostile, or let's say frightened by a return of Russian power, whether it's in its different roles throughout history, whether before it was the Tsarist, then the Soviet, and now under the Russian Federation of Vladimir. So sorry, I don't want to bring it to, but there is a reference, constant reference between historical, ancient history and contemporary history to what is happening now, and that is also the backbone of my book that you kindly showed before. So I think we have to keep in mind all of these considerations when asked about future development of the relations between Europe and Russia in this very crisis.
Thank you very much for your comments. I think a very interesting aspect of this crisis is that it is basically a European crisis, okay? And so the US, we have seen that it's not really involved in Europe, because its focus is mainly in Asia. So what is your opinion regarding the US response, and in particular, what is going to happen also on the front of the transatlantic relations, so between like Berlin, Paris, Rome, and Washington? For you both, so you want both comment. You can start.
Either one is fine. Giorgio, you want to go first, or you want me to?
Well, it's up to.
All right, I'll go. I'll make a couple of comments. I'll make a couple of comments. I'm a Europeanist, and I am also a Russia hand by training. And so I was one of those people who a year ago was disappointed by the Biden administration discussion of China first. And we heard that as well from Obama. And what this crisis has done is it has refocused, I'm not going to say reset, that's a bad word, refocused attention by the White House on Europe and Russia. So while you still see the debate about who's the greater threat, Russia or China or Iran, Russia or China, you now see Russia talked about much more, have much more time and attention given to it than even a year ago. And I think those people who even recently argued that we ought to be friends with Russia to flirt, bring it away from China, that's a legitimate, respectable position in Washington. I think those people are now losing ground. The U.S. is realizing that both the threat from Asia, but also the need to have NATO unity in the face of Russian revanchism is very important. So what you're going to see now, I think, in the coming months, however this crisis works out, is the U.S. to rebalance that emphasis along the lines that I said. So Putin, at least, has made himself well-known and center of attention in Washington. And that's a major difference from a year ago, when people thought, well, Russia's a regional power, or Russia's fading and decline, whatever it might be. So that is one effect of the crisis that people don't talk about all that much, but it's very evident to those of us who work with the government.
Well, transatlantic relations, we come from 4 years of Trump administration in which these relations were pretty consumed, let's say. These relations was weakened by the different stances that the Trump administration, also maybe rightfully, put forth with their European allies in terms of spending and all the issues that we know. And and also from the European side, we had this strange comment made by French President Macron, which literally said that NATO was a brain dead organization. And now we are seeing, with respect to these recent comments and recent stances on NATO from both sides of the Atlantic, we're seeing a kind of a unexpected resurrection of NATO in face of this. And this is maybe a boomerang effect that also the Russian establishment didn't imagine to be as it is structuring right now. And so we're seeing a kind of at least of a unity coming from NATO and from the West, especially from the UK and the United States. And as well, a more armed Ukraine. We have a more armed Ukraine now, is receiving a lot of military equipment, and so signs that NATO is actually resurrecting a bit from its state of hostility coming from its own members. And so I think that these are some key elements in this discussion.
Could I add a comment, sir?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Hi. I very much agree with what Giorgio said. A couple points. Number one is that from the beginning of this crisis, just as with Obama, the issue of alliance management, doing things in tandem with the alliance, has been a major factor. There were many people in Washington who wanted to kill Nord Stream 2 a year ago, but it didn't happen because the Biden administration values, no matter what the French say, Giorgio, values alliance relationships very highly, and they're very reluctant to get ahead of the rest. Some people in DC disagree with that, but it's a symbol, it's a sign, I think, of the commitment the White House has to having good relationships with Western Europe, with Europe, including France. The second is that I don't know how much all of you pay attention to U.S. domestic politics, but there is still an isolationist strain in the American electorate, which you see pretty frequently, and those people are waiting there, asking, why are we helping Russia? Why at all? And they're not a majority, and they're mostly in the Republican Party, but they are asking that. And I think since there is a good chance that the Republicans will come back into power in 2025, next semester, I think that bears, for those of us like our friends here on the camera today, that bears some watching, because wherever the Biden administration is now is not necessarily where the U.S. will be 4 years from now. And if somehow this backfires, this pushback on Russia backfires on the president and his administration, as Kabul did, then I think there are going to be some serious political consequences for our relations with the alliance as well, the European alliance as well.
One quick comment, Lorenzo, sorry, just concerning this issue of NATO and stuff. I mentioned France before, and I wanted to add another thing, because France is having real issues in other geopolitical scenarios like in Mali, in the Sahel, in Africa, which actually is a pretty big problem when it comes to imperial standing of France right now. And so France now needs NATO even more because two new situations arose. One in Africa that maybe wasn't expected as much as it is, and the crisis situation in Ukraine, which could also be not the second Ukrainian crisis. So there are also these other aspects, merely in terms of imperial fatigues of Another point is that there are no steps ahead in terms of a European defense program or a union. So you have also to take into consideration these 2 points when dealing with and when reflecting about NATO's role right now and the transatlantic relations.
May I ask a question to both of you?
Sure.
Yes. On Saturday, President Lukashenko has said that the Russian army will stay in Belarus. It means that now the Russian army will be just in front of NATO countries, the Baltic and the Polish one. How this will change the narrative, in your opinion?
Well, if I could go first, Giorgio, whatever you like. Daniele, I've warned about this to my colleagues here for 2 years, which is to say you have this dynamic where after several years of Belarus leveraging itself to get more independent from Moscow, and as you remember, under Trump, there were even some diplomatic initiatives by the West to Lukashenko. That's now gone now. I think it's gone forever. And it's gone because of course, how he crushed down an election last year that he already lost. But I think, in my view, is the Russian reaction to all of this has been very interesting. Whereas 2 years ago, I heard from a lot of my Russian contacts that they wanted Lukashenko gone. Now it appears that he's back a little bit in the saddle with Putin, and they're acting, as you saw over the weekend, Daniele, as partners. But I do not think that is a clean friendship. I think that he still wants to get some autonomy from the Kremlin, even as the Kremlin is hugging him and removing his autonomy, his freedom of maneuver. So we're seeing those things go on at once. Russia does not have to annex Belarus to have its military on the ground there, which is very threatening, not only to Ukraine, but to Poland and Lithuania. And that seems to be what we're going toward right now. There have been military exercises by the Russian armed forces in Belarus monthly since August 2020, when the election took place. So this is, I think, going to be a more or less permanent situation. It's very threatening to Ukraine, but of course it's always also threatening to the eastern flank of NATO. I go back to the weaponization of immigration, which we saw last year. And while everybody thought Putin sort of invented it and then had Lukashenko carry it out, I'm not so sure. To me, it may well have been, I'm just speculating, it may well have been that Lukashenko did this and then the Kremlin took advantage of the opportunity. And what you saw was the pressure on the Polish and Lithuanian borders. And those refugees, by the way, are still largely there. So I think Putin does not have to annex Belarus formally. He can get much of what he wants by acting in the gray area as he's doing right now. And frankly, Giorgio, to the German allies who are nervous about this, like maybe Germany, European allies, maybe Germany, they're less likely to react if the Kremlin has sort of a soft annexation of Belarus than they would be to an outright takeover. So we're in a very ambiguous point here, which I think the Kremlin is manipulating pretty effectively.
Well, I share Donald's views about Belarus. I think that for both of us, the staying of Russian troops in Belarus doesn't come as a big surprise. I think it could have been seen ahead. And yeah, he was right about past Belarus years of flirting with different powers than Russia. Lukashenko did that with the West and with China, but ultimately during the protest, crushing of the protest after the election, he now desperately needs Russia. He now, of course, really he has a necessity of having a further militarization of his country. And so I don't think it's going to be a problem for Lukashenko's Belarus at this point to host Russia's military for a longer time. And yeah, those times of flirting with other powers for sure are gone for Belarus, at least for a while, for a long while for sure. Donald mentioned as well the issue of immigration of floods of immigrants from Belarus, and now the same thing could happen again with people from the Donbass, or even if the conflict expands from the whole Ukraine. And getting back to the very core of your question, yeah, indeed, it is a very dangerous military confrontation right now between between the Russian forces positioned also in Belarus and the NATO alliance members that are right next to them. So think about the Suwalki Gap, think about the Baltic states, and that might be isolated from Europe in case of a Russian offensive. So that's just concerning military concerns. One last thing is that I just wanted to point out in pure geopolitical terms. Why is Russia acting like that with regard to Ukraine? Ukraine, Georgia, and Belarus are the three states which are bordering Russia, which are so close to the Russian, so delicate and so precious western borders of Russia, in which the Russian political establishment has always put so much attention and dedication, as if the eastern borders were not even existing. So in Ukraine, Georgia, and Belarus, Russia has the last buffer states, at least in the Russian perspective, because Ukraine as well has always functioned as a buffer zone, and not only a buffer zone for Russia, but also for the West. Just think about, I think that Donald now is already thinking about Pilsudski Intermarium geopolitical project of the 20th century, of Prometheism and stuff. So we are seeing cyclically these geopolitical theories coming back to life again, and I think that this is something that we could see in the upcoming weeks. Of course, if things get worse, if the diplomacy doesn't reach a stop to the tensions.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one last question for you both, actually, because a few days ago, a very interesting poll emerged regarding the will of Ukrainians to join both NATO and Europe, the European Union. So can you comment on that? What do you mean this? What does poll mean?
Donald, you go first as usual.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for showing the poll. I think in many ways, Vladimir Putin is the father of the modern Ukrainian state. In 2014, when, let's face it, a lot of experts who followed Russia for years didn't really know about Ukraine very much, we have thought about certain stereotypes. The country is divided by language or religion or East-West or whatever you might want to say, or ethnicity. But I think that, as you see from the poll, gentlemen, the trend toward Ukrainian support for NATO membership, and even if it never happens, is steady and remarkable. And the poll of Ukrainian support for European community membership is even more remarkable. And in response to, when I saw this poll 2 weeks ago, I wrote back the author of the findings, and she said that even by region, every region now supports European Union membership, including the East, and every region except for the Donbass East supports NATO membership. And this has been a remarkable change in only 8 years. And I always ask myself whether, and if you've been to Kiev recently, you'll see how people think of themselves as Central Europeans. Now, that's something Putin wants to stop, I'm sure. And I'm not even sure if the Kremlin realizes how much the people's attitudes have changed. This poll shows it, of course. Now, the East is still a problem. The East is not only in bad shape economically and politically, but the East is still ambivalent about a drift to the West. But that there has been a Ukrainian drift to the West is beyond question. And again, that may not be in NATO membership. Certainly, NATO membership will not happen anytime soon. But it's worth knowing because it affects a lot of our calculus about the country. Certainly, the Ukrainians will defend themselves against a Russian invasion, even Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And there have been a lot of press articles about Kharkiv recently, and as you probably know, Kharkiv is in the northeastern part of the country, very close to the Russian border, Russian-speaking, but it's strongly pro-Kiev. So the map is very complicated, but what you see on the poll reflects, in my experience, and reflects the findings of other researchers, which is that NATO and EU expansion membership is strongly favored by most people, even if they may never happen. But that shows where the people's thoughts and values are at the moment.
Well, I will be very quick because Donald said it all about this issue. Just saying that the promise of access to NATO has been around since 2008 at the Bucharest summit, at the NATO Bucharest summit. The same goes for Georgia. So it was not a broken promise, but it was maybe a hollow promise. I don't know how we should define that. At the same time, we know that for the merely geopolitical reasons I explained before, of territorial contiguity from the western Russian borders, it's very sensitive to the Russian establishment, political establishment, the Georgian and Ukrainian access to NATO. It's something that, after all, what we have seen these days, it's not gonna be a reality anytime soon. But again, just looking at this Ukrainian will towards NATO and towards also the whole, I guess, way of life and institutional system of the West is pretty strong. And I was also impressed. What struck me, one of Zelensky's really straightforward statement that he did some days ago. He said Ukraine as a security shield for Europe. So the will to really be within the European system is still very strong, if not stronger than it used to be during what we could now name the first Ukrainian crisis of the 21st century. Now we are entering a second Ukrainian crisis, or a second phase of the biggest international politics crisis of the 21st century.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to finish this very interesting conversation, a very quick answer. Who's going to decide how this crisis unfolds? The market or the politicians? Because it's very interesting also this aspect, because the ruble is sinking, and Europe also has a problem with energy. So who's going to decide how this is going to end?
Was your choice political and or economic, the market, or political? What was your question? What are the alternatives?
Yeah, the market or like politicians or politics.
Giorgio, Vladimir Putin will decide. And he will decide even if it's to the harm of his own country. And if he acts aggressively or militarily, I think that over the long run is going to hurt Russia severely. And I think, Giorgio and I talked earlier today about your view from Europe. And I do think that even among those countries which are traditionally closer to Moscow, I'm thinking of Germany, I don't think this will be forgotten anytime soon. And that may well determine the shape of geopolitics in the continent in the next several years. It also may shape a lot of economic choices. So I would say right now it's the politicians and Putin who will decide more than the market. But that's just me.
Well, for sure, power politics will have a major impact in the evolution of this crisis. But at the very same time, this situation has helped Russia financially, because oil prices skyrocketed throughout the whole crisis so far. So Russia has had economical gains out of this so far. But again, it's also, there are the shadow of incumbent sanctions, which could be very, very hard for the Russian political establishment as well, and for the Russian economy, because from what we know, these sanctions might be very widely reaching. I mean, in different dimensions of Russian societies and the political establishment itself, Russia's elite. So I think that there is an ongoing contrast between certain political power factions within the Russian establishment and the oligarchs, who don't want to see their wealth and their status diminished drastically by potential sanctions. So a mix of elements, but of course it's Vladimir Putin who has the final decision and power politics ultimately.
Okay, thank you very much for your very interesting answers. Thank you, Dr. Jensen, for participating to this very interesting discussion. Thank you, Dr. Cella. I strongly remind you all to read this book, History and Geopolitics of the Ukrainian Crisis, and of course to follow Dr. Jensen publications. So again, thank you very much to you all. Yes.
Which will be hopefully and possibly translated and published into English in 2022. So.
Okay.
Giorgio, I'm half Italian. I read Italian very well, and so I could, either way would be fine.
Either way, that's great.
If we could have the link, you could send me the link when you're done with it. I will see if I'll send it around USIP to expand the audience a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Daniele Moro also from Washington, D.C. Thank you to the US-Italy Global Affairs Forum and to Limes Club Washington, D.C. See you next time. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.